along with a lot of other people in America in particular, are very anxious and very concerned with the way what I call a liberal education, an education about that's balanced, impartial, that actually talks about or talks to students in a fair way. We've lost that liberal education, and it's now very woke, it's all about indoctrination, all about cultural left indoctrination, as I say. So I'm very worried, very concerned. And I edited a book, Cancel Culture and the Left's Long March, where we had 11 people writing a chapter each. And one of those chapters actually traces it back to the Frankfurt school in Germany that began during the 1920s, where a number of academics actually discovered that the revolution was not going to work in the West. It happened in Russia and China, but it was never going to happen in Europe or America. So the Frankfurt School, these academics, they came up with the idea of cultural Marxism, which was about the left infiltrating, taking control of our universities, our schools, trade unions, the family. It's the Long March, and that idea goes back to the Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci, who wrote during the Second World War. So it's been going on for many, many years, and it's only now that people are beginning to realise, or the general public, how successful it's been in terms of taking over many of those institutions. I taught literature for many years. George Orwell, 1984, was one of the books I always taught. And Winston Smith, in that book, his job is in the Ministry of Truth, which is a misnomer. It's actually about, like Stalin did, like Mao did, like Hitler did. What dictators do is control how people think by controlling the language. And in 1984, we see that one of the slogans is, war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Now, we know that's ridiculous. We know the opposite is true. But what happens in 1984, people are so conditioned, people are so indoctrinated that they believe that. And that's beginning to happen in the West more generally now, around the world, in schools, in universities. Language is being changed, and all will argue if you can control language, you control how people think. So whether it's gender identity, you can no longer use binary pronouns like he and she. You have to say they. If you talk about European civilization, you can't say it's beneficial. It's all about white supremacism. So they're using language now to control how people think. In Australia, for example, I organised a one-day event last year. We had parents and community people from all around Australia, and they're starting their own classical education schools. They're so worried about what is happening in the government schools in particular with this indoctrination that they're beginning to establish their own schools, and they're very much involved in a classical education. And that is happening in America, obviously. It's beginning to happen in Australia. And in Australia, the other evidence of this is one of the fastest growing school enrolments is in non-denominational, low-fee paying Christian schools. Now, these Christian schools, parents are voting with their feet to enrol them because they feel these schools will give their children a good moral compass, a good foundation in academic studies based on that classical curriculum approach. So I'm optimistic, I'm positive now to see that there is a bit of a pendulum is moving back.
The movement away from classical education was very slow. This happened over a long period of time. You know, the analogy with a frog in boiling water is a great one. The frog doesn't know that the water is getting hot and will sit there and boil to death. Over time, we've removed penmanship. Over time, we've removed a focus on logic and rhetoric and grammar. Over time, we've removed this aim of the goal of education being the cultivation of virtue and good character. And it happened slowly enough where people just weren't that alarmed because it happened over. But now people are waking up to, wow, what we're doing now is completely disconnected from what everybody did for millennia. And when a parent hears about classical education, an education that's rooted in, cultivating wonder in their child, an education that's focused on helping them to grow in the virtues, become more honest, more diligent. Every parent across the political spectrum wants this for their child. And I think that is why it's becoming so popular, is people are just discovering what it is, and they're comparing it to mainstream education, and classical wins every time. I think one of the jobs that's been lost of a great teacher, it hasn't been wholly lost. Even in public schools, a great teacher has retained this. But one of the things a teacher is able to do, and this is as old as we can go back, is shape the affections of young people, right? The way Aristotle understood the goal of education is helping young people to learn to love what they ought to love, truth, goodness, beauty, and to hate what they ought to hate, injustice, cowardice, vice, wherever we see these things. There is no job on earth, in some ways, that's more powerful or more important than that, being able to shape the next generation in such a fundamental way. It's extremely important work.